welcome to the Pink Ink Classroom. Come on in and let's get started. Today in the classroom, we are going to learn how to shade and highlight glass, specifically an old-fashioned ball jar. I have two examples here that we're going to work on today. One of them has highlights drawn into it, and you can see it on the stamp here. The second one does not. So on this one, we're going to learn how to put our own highlights in. So I'd like to use a real ball jar as a bit of a show and tell. This is actually the model that I used to create this rubber stamp. And I want to point out that you get a highlight across the shoulder of the jar here. And there are some darker areas as well, where the lettering is, along the sides of the jar, and especially at the bottom, because these are the areas where the glass is going to be more than one thickness. So these are just things to keep in mind as we're working on the ball jars today. And now let's begin with the one that has the highlights drawn in. We're going to do this stamp with a selection of aqua colors and the second one with a selection of greens. Here's my examples right here. So we're going to color this Atlas Mason jar with a lovely blend of blue and aqua, kind of a classic mason jar color. And again, we're going to start by putting in a base layer. So I'm using this soft sky blue to color in the jar, and I go right over the stems that I've already colored in. But what I don't want to color in are these little circular highlights that have been drawn onto the stamp. We're going to let the white of the paper create a highlight on this jar by just leaving it white. So we color around those and color in basically everything else right on top of the stems, because the stems would be inside the jar, so the color of the jar would actually flow on top of the stems. Now I'm going to switch to this slightly darker deco blue and start shading the perimeter of the jar here all the way around. It's pretty much of an outline which reflects the thickness of the glass. And I'm going to carry this color all the way up into the threads on the neck of the jar. And then just begin to color around the highlights a little bit. Now you also want to deepen up the color on this little glass hump that's at the bottom of the jar. So these are the areas that I'm going to start to darken. Now I'm going to go in with my light aqua. I'm going to re-emphasize the outline a little bit all the way around, and especially across the bottom. And now I'm going to start pushing the color into the center of the jar very gently. You want to go from darker to lighter as you get towards the middle. This is a cylindrical object, so it would be darker at each edge and a little bit lighter in the middle. And again, I'm going around those highlights and maybe a little bit darker underneath the neck of the jar, and you could even add a little bit of outline where those little grooves are, like so. The last thing I'm going to do with this color is darken up the lettering. And this is a case where you want to make sure you have a nice sharp point on your pencil. No point in fighting to get into these little lines here. Make it easy on yourself. And this is just pretty much a fill-in technique. But again, the glass would be double thickness here, so you want it to be darker. So I'm just outlining the words and the logo here. Now the last thing I'm going to do is take my very darkest aquamarine, and I'm going to add yet a little more color at the very bottom of the jar, because that's where it would be the darkest in real life, and maybe just a hint underneath the neck of this jar. So now we have a nice aqua-colored ball jar with a nice contrast of dark and white highlight. For the second jar, we're going to add our own highlights because this illustration does not have the highlights drawn in, but it still needs to have highlights, so we're going to put in our own. I'm using this big copy here so you can kind of see up close where I've put highlights in. There are a couple on the shoulders of the jar, one here, a little one along this side here. This is a drawn in one here, so I leave this area white. So those are just some areas where you can add your own highlights. Now we're going to switch to the real size version, and I'm going to do this one in a nice soft green instead, kind of more of a fall color. And again, I'm going to start by adding in a base layer, but this time I'm going to draw in a little white, kind of a jelly bean shape or an oval on each of these little upper areas where there are no stems showing, and deepen up the bottom and just add a nice little base layer with this sage green. Maybe I'll leave this little area here white as well. Fill in the rest of it. I want to add one here up at the top. There's some artist choice here going on. You can kind of pick where you want it to go, but generally the shoulder of the jar would be where the sun would hit it for sure. And then on this lid to the right, I'm going to use the one that's drawn in there. It looks kind of like a little Nike swoosh to be the highlight on the lid. So next I'm going to switch to a little darker green. Again, I'm going to deepen up around the perimeter of the jar, all the way around. It's pretty much just like making an outline, really. And underneath the neck of the jar here, into here. The darkness would continue up into the neck, so this outline keeps going all the way up to the top. And again, anytime you get these thicknesses on top of each other, it's going to be a little bit darker there. So I've left highlights here, 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 and here. And I'm going to do a little fill in with this color. And again, get that little hump at the bottom. Now I'm going to start pushing the color in toward the center a little bit. Darker at the edges and light in the middle. Sort of your cylindrical object watchword. And darker behind the jar here and lighter as you go out to the edge on the lid. And these are two little indentations for your thumbs, and so those should be a little darker as well. Now I'm switching to this even darker parrot green and kind of beefing up the bottom of the jar just like I did on the first one. And back behind that lid. And now I'm going to use this because I want a little more contrast between the stems and the jar on this one. I'm going to use the darker color as my shader for the lettering. Make a little bit more contrast that way. You can just kind of follow the natural lines of the cursive writing is the easiest way to fill it in. Just pretend you're kind of writing the word ball with the pencil. Maybe a little bit up into here. All I'm doing is now is just kind of, I'm re-emphasizing those highlights a little bit so they're a little more distinctive with that darkest aqua. And again, you're looking for that range of value that gives you the most interesting effects. Now the last thing I want to do to finish, I'm going to use this metallic silver pencil and I'm going to fill in the wire handle. And again, as the handle bows out, I want to leave a little white spot where the highlight would be. So just pull that down, maybe right here on this corner, and then pull it up into this area. The very last thing I like to do in an object like this that is sitting on a surface is to add a little bit of shadow right underneath it. So the easiest way to do that is to rotate it 90 degrees, color a nice little border right along the edge of the glass. I'm going to go all the way under the jar and the lid, and then just pull that softly out. Boy, it's just like a 1/16 of an inch or so, but it's just enough to give that jar a little bit of an anchor on a table surface. And if you turn it back, you can see how nicely that helps it sit and look like a real object. So these are our two ball jars with highlights, both drawn and freehand. And that's our lesson for today.